Good morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, we're back at it. I hope you all are having a good start to your week. So I wanted to go ahead and start the show this week on kind of a fun note. On the show before, I have talked about Japan's indispensable man in World War II. Now, who was that? That was Admiral Yamamoto. Yamamoto was Japan's hero. Yamamoto was the guy that organized the attack against Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto believed before they attacked Pearl Harbor that the only way that Japan could win was by making it a short war against the United States. To be fair, before World War II started, Japan had a better navy than the US. But Yamamoto believed that destroying those ships at Pearl Harbor could elevate the Japanese advantage on the water. Now, also what he wanted to do, he wanted to kill American naval officers. Good officers take time to replace, years and years. And let's be honest, Yamamoto was successful at Pearl Harbor, but the unfortunate thing for the Japanese is that it galvanized the US response after that. Even after Pearl Harbor, Japan still had the advantage. The Japanese combined fleet was superior to the US Navy in the Pacific at the initiation of hostilities. Now, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, that calculus changed. Yamamoto had wanted to capture the Midway Atoll. He wanted to capture Midway to draw out U.S. naval forces. Capturing Midway would expose the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Now, what you have to remember is that Japan was aggressively expanding in the Pacific. The Japanese had started bombing Midway. So they're bombing Midway prior to capturing it. That bombing, again, was designed to lure out the Pacific Fleet. The Pacific Fleet was led by a guy named Admiral Chester Nimitz. Well, here's Nimitz. He's being lured into Midway by the Japanese attack. Nimitz had an advantage, though, U.S. codebreakers. U.S. codebreakers knew of the Japanese plans to attack Midway. Nimitz also knew from the codebreakers that the Japanese forces would split apart when this whole thing happened. So the Japanese had 4 elements that were split apart in their attack at Midway. That was their trap that they were getting ready to spring. It's almost like a pincers. Almost like a pincers ready to attack the U.S. naval fleet when it came to Midway's defense. Now, the problem with it is, from the Japanese perspective, is those 4 elements were so widely separated that they could not assist each other. Now, the other advantage that the U.S. military had beyond the codes was that the U.S. fleet had more aircraft than the Japanese. The U.S. had aircraft on Midway and they had carrier strike vessels. So Nimitz sees what the Japanese are doing on Midway. He sees the plan that they're concocting. Well, Nimitz is able to then plan a counterstrike. He plans a U.S. ambush. So the U.S. under Nimitz then surprised the Japanese. Well, what did he do? Nimitz sprang his trap at Midway. Again, carrier-based planes, Midway-based planes. They attacked the 4 separate Japanese forces at the same time. Well, this attack at Midway, Nimitz's ambush at Midway, proved ultimately fatal to the Japanese. 4 Japanese carriers were sunk in the engagement at Midway. 1 heavy cruiser sank. Japan took 3,000 dead at Midway. But the largest loss for the Japanese was in their planes and in their pilots. Japan did not have the capacity to rebuild fighter planes quickly like the United States did. Pilots were very hard to train. That whole issue later in the war led to kamikaze attacks. Midway, very similar to Guadalcanal, Midway was a turning point where the U.S. held the advantage. The issue more broadly for the United States was, after Midway, is that Yamamoto still lived. Remember, Yamamoto was the Japanese hero. While Yamamoto survived, the Japanese believed that they could win. They believed that they could win the war if Yamamoto was leaving them. So what does that do? That causes the Americans to want to kill Yamamoto. You kill Yamamoto, you kill Japanese hope. So what the Americans did then is that the U.S. then planned an operation. That operation was called Operation Vengeance. Well, U.S. naval intelligence kept breaking Japanese codes. They found plans of military tours, military inspections. They found Yamamoto's itinerary. US codebreakers found out where Yamamoto would be. Yamamoto would be in the Solomon Islands on a plane, technically 2 bomber planes. 2 bomber planes escorted by 6 fighter planes. And a little background on this whole thing with Operation Vengeance. FDR apparently had told military leaders to, quote, get Yamamoto. The decision, however, to act militarily was left to Nimitz and Halsey, and Halsey was Bull Halsey. He was Nimitz's counterpart in the Pacific. The problem with, quote, getting Yamamoto, what FDR wanted, was that if they did that, it would reveal to the Japanese that their codes had been broken. But military hierarchy decided that Yamamoto was worth the risk. So they know where Yamamoto is going to be. So what the Navy did is the Navy assigned 18 P-38s to attack Yamamoto while he was flying. There would be 2 P-38s that would provide cover, and the other 16 P-38s were in these 4 killer groups. So those P-38s took off from Guadalcanal to intercept Yamamoto above the Solomon Islands. And it's interesting, just as a side note, this is the longest fighter intercept in World War II. They knew this thing down to the minute. The P-38s engaged Yamamoto's air squadron 1 minute ahead of schedule. The P-38s destroyed 2 planes. They routed the 6 Japanese fighters. So Yamamoto's plane crashes. Well, the crash site with Yamamoto's body was found the day after the attack. Yamamoto himself was found in his seat, easily identifiable. He had 2 bullet wounds, one to the head and one to the shoulder. Now, this event of Yamamoto being shot down, this event shocked the Japanese. The Japanese media called it the Navy A incident. It took 5 days for the US media to even find out this happened. This was a huge event nationally. You got to remember, Yamamoto was a US villain. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor. He was the hero of the Japanese. Now, it's interesting, our own ally, Britain, Churchill was totally outraged by this. This was so secretive that we didn't even notify Britain about it. But if you look at it from a historical perspective, from US military perspective, this was 1,000% a targeted kill by the US military. And it's interesting, too, in this whole situation, the US public did not learn about code breaking until after the war. Now, I said you had 16 P-38s that attacked this flight squad. Credit for the kill was actually very challenging. There were 2 US airmen that were credited for the kill. That was Thomas Lamphere and Rex Barber. There was so much lead flying here that they really couldn't figure out and assign the actual kill. That argument actually persisted for years, but either which way you want to look at it from the kill perspective, this was an enormous moment in World War II. Not only was it a big moment in World War II, that specific killing and the specific targeting of Yamamoto was a huge topic of debate for years after World War II. Why? It was not a battlefield kill. This was a targeted military assassination. The closest equivalent to modern times was when Iranian General Soleimani was killed in 2020. US media, when Soleimani was killed, you actually saw the invocation of Yamamoto. But I guess either which way you want to look at it, when we targeted and killed Yamamoto, Japan lost their hero. They lost their shining star. And I guess the rest is history. But that's just a forgotten operation of World War II where we killed the Japanese hero. Thank God for all the pilots in the P-38s, and thank God for our code breakers. Again, the best among us. But I thought it would be a great way to start the week off with Operation Vengeance from World War II. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So, switching gears to something that occurred over the weekend as well, I wanted to go ahead and address this ridiculous No Kings deal. And I guess just looking at this, it just seems to me like No Kings kind of just sprang out of the ether. I mean, I watch liberal media. I wasn't even aware of this until I started seeing like Bruce Springsteen start promoting it last Wednesday. But my question about this whole No Kings thing is just, what is the point of this whole deal? And I guess not just what is the point, what is the aim of the people that are doing this? What is the objective? Because if you look at it, Trump was democratically elected. I think we all understand that. And we don't have a king here. And these people all know that. And just to level set my opinion on this whole thing, this is the same party and the same people of COVID tyranny. These were COVID tyrants that wanted you to wear your mask of obedience, your shot of social acceptance. It's just so interesting, even from a political science standpoint. This is the same party in the Democrat Party. They haven't had primaries for Democratic presidential candidates for like 10 years. So I guess if I look at it, they know quite well we don't have a king, but they love kings. So again, circling back to my initial question, what exactly is this? And I guess, what is this other than a waste of a pleasant Saturday afternoon? But I guess I just want to make a note of this because the No Kings flagship march was in St. Paul, Minnesota this weekend. So this is the flagship protest for No Kings. Well, of course, if you're going to have something like this, you need a permit to assemble. So who paid for the permit for these people to assemble for this No Kings thing in St. Paul, Minnesota? Well, the permit was paid for by a thing called Indivisible. Well, what is Indivisible? Indivisible is a very rich Democrat advocacy group. And I guess, okay, I'm tracking with you guys. So I understand it's funded by Democrats, Democrat advocacy groups, but who funds Indivisible? Well, that would be George Soros. So Fox News actually did some real journalism over the weekend and actually sent somebody out to investigate this. So you have a Democrat nonprofit paid for by the terrorist George Soros who's running this. And good for Fox News, they kept digging because it doesn't stop there. The onion kept getting peeled back a layer at a time. A guy named Neville Royal Singham was involved with this. Well, who is Singham? You probably never heard that name before. Well, Singham is an American tech tycoon. Okay, so he's an American tech guy. The problem with it is he's a radical communist who lives in China. So I'm looking at this. You've got George Soros, the terrorist, partnering up with a radical communist who lives in China. Anybody else in this witch's brew of commies? So Fox News kept digging into this. There is a network of 500 groups, Democrat advocacy groups, that paid for and coordinated this whole deal. You have 500 communist Democrat groups with $3 billion in revenue paying for this. And when I say communist, I mean communist. That group of 500 includes communist groups. Communist groups calling for a revolution. So to be clear, socialist and communist groups fund this No Kings deal. You want to know the names of some of them? So I'm not just making it up. How about the Party for Socialism and Liberation? The People's Forum. Look, as a student of political science and history, what you are watching with this No Kings thing is a color revolution. If you looked at they're never going to show this on like MSNBC or CNN. A lot of these protests had communist flags, Antifa flags. These people are total revolutionaries. And I guess it's interesting to me, I just mentioned CNN and MSNBC. Here's Fox News waking up out of its coma looking into this. So I guess circling back to my initial question, what is this? So if you start looking at where the money's coming from to fund these kind of revolutionary protests, then what No Kings is becomes really, really clear. And it's just so interesting to me, the well-meaning liberals who attend these deals are political pawns. Vladimir Lenin described people like this as useful idiots. And I guess, what is a useful idiot? I wanted to give you the quote just to think about. What is a useful idiot in a political science perspective? Quote, a person who thinks they are fighting for a cause without fully realizing the consequences of their actions. A person who does not comprehend that they are being manipulated by the cause's leaders or by other political players, end quote. A person who thinks they're fighting for a cause without realizing the consequences of, boy, you couldn't have nailed No Kings any better. And again, a student of history, Wearing the red sash of the Bolsheviks is great until you're the one getting lined up against the wall. Ask the Romanovs about that. But so what I look at No Kings and realize is this is just political insurgency. All these things do, and then they put it on MSNBC, CNN, like it's some kind of benign power to the people deal. It's a political insurgency radicalizing people. And what I think they're doing is they're mobilizing these people's anger for 2026, 2028, and onward. They've put this seed of revolution into the general population's brain. It keeps the base angry and mobilized. Let me give you a thought experiment. Because I deal with this all the time. Look at the tariff deal that came out of the Supreme Court. If you have a passing understanding of politics and what occurs at the Supreme Court, all an ill-informed person believes is that Donald Trump was told by the Supreme Court that he couldn't do tariffs. No tariffs by the Supreme Court on Hitler, Donald Trump. When in reality, that's not true at all. Donald Trump can absolutely use tariffs. He just couldn't use the very narrow tariff that was litigated at the Supreme Court in the lawsuit. Donald Trump, as the executive, has plenty of tariff power, but that's not what's portrayed in the media. All that's portrayed in the media is that Donald Trump was told no, and then he keeps doing it. And again, tie that to No Kings. A No Kings person, look, if you're going to go waste your Saturday afternoon on something this foolish, your elevator probably doesn't go all the way to the top. So somebody in a No Kings deal, to their brain, Donald Trump was told no by the court, and he's doing it anyway. They're not digging it. They're not doing the secondary information part of it that's required to make a fully informed decision. But either which way you want to look at it, the narrative about what's occurring with Donald Trump has been set by the media. And I guess play that out with something that's even occurring now. Look at the SAVE Act. If the SAVE Act fails legislatively, it is very possible that Donald Trump is going to declare national security to secure our elections with an executive order. What happens then? So if Donald Trump has to cut an executive order that alleges fraud, it alleges foreign interference, he says, hey, we have to federalize elections for 2026 because of national security issues. What happens then? These people at these No Kings thing are not going to accept that. They're not going to accept that there are national security issues. What it's going to be, the narrative is going to be, hey, Hitler is now federalizing elections. The night of the long knives is next. It's Hitler bypassing Congress. And I guess distill it into its most basic form. What this is, by the media and by these people in the No Kings and the communists that fund it, this is predictive narrative control. And I'm just looking at this as a color revolution, but I would think more broadly and more specific, well, really more specifically, is that we are being primed for something here. That's what it appears like to me. Because if Donald Trump does have to drop the hammer on the SAVE Act, on the Russiagate thing, they're just priming these people for mass unrest. And the Democrat Party, to be fair, does this all the time. They want to capture future public opinion. They want people to think that this guy's Hitler. Because again, otherwise, go back to my initial question. What is the point of this whole No Kings thing other than a waste of a perfectly beautiful Saturday afternoon? They're not accomplishing anything. No legislation was entered. Nobody's mind was changed. It's just like this calcification to, air quotes, the cause in the rebel's head. And it's not really a rebel, it's really like a deranged person. But it allows these people to cosplay as the Rebel Alliance fighting against the evil empire and Darth Vader. And I've talked about in the show before, it is total moral cosplay. But what I would tell you is, we are going to reach a convergence here. There will be a convergence of events that are going to happen. It has to. It's inevitable. But just watching this whole No Kings thing, I'm just scratching my head trying to understand what's going on here. And it's funny, before I end this segment, I was driving home and I left my cabin. I was coming up back north. And here I see all these people on a bridge and they have this huge sign that says no pedos on it. So these guys, they literally spent their work week making up this huge sign that says no pedos, and then you go waste a Saturday afternoon hanging that from a bridge. To accomplish what? It's a total clown show. Again, I think we're running into a confluence of events here. It's going to happen pretty soon, but we're being primed for something. But I guess we'll all be watching it. So I did have a quick hit, not a switching gears. So I saw over the weekend this whole deal in Pennsylvania, and I had to laugh. So here's Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania House Democrats, so these are state Democrats in Pennsylvania, they put a bill up. They put a bill up in the legislature to consider. Well, you might be curious, what's the bill? What's the bill? So the Pennsylvania House Democrat Party wanted to declare March as National Women's Month. And hey, that's wonderful. I think that's great. Let's have March as National Women's Month. I think that's terrific. Let's honor our wives. Let's honor our mothers. Let's honor our sisters. I think that's great. Well, why am I talking about it on the Foggy Dew? The reason I'm talking about it is because there was a problem with the bill. The Democrats introduced the legislation and then they withdrew the bill from consideration. And you might be asking yourself as you're driving down the road or whatever, why would they withdraw this bill? Because it just seems to make common sense, right? What happened is that they present the bill and then a Republican asked a very simple question. The question, quote, how do you define a woman for National Women's Month, end quote. The Democrats were unable to answer this simple question. They don't say it's an adult biological female. They withdrew the bill. And I guess having politicians of any stripe stumped by a simple biological question is certainly a jarring thing to see. But to me, it's almost like they glitched. It's like a glitch in their programming. If they're forced to define it, the matrix breaks. But I had to laugh because Orwell was right, wasn't he? It's the subversion of the English language in real time. It's not the word woman, it's the political frame in which woman is used. Because it's not about women. It's about the political framing of the word woman because it's about control. It's political control over the English language. This entire thing, if you back to the Democrat pillars of like the whole Democrat Party pillars of their thoughts, it's never about women. It's never about pronouns. It's about power, naked power. But I just wanted to make a note of this because I thought it was so interesting. Quote, what is a woman in the matrix glitches? How embarrassing is that? Trust me, I'll be watching to see if they resubmit it, but I doubt they will. They just painted themselves into an intellectual corner. It's so crazy. So switching gears, kind of a parallel topic, what I wanted to do is go ahead and look forward into 2028. Now, if you look forward to 2028, I think you've got Rubio, you've got Vance, you've got DeSantis. Those three guys look kind of like the cream of the Republican crop, right? And I've talked about this on the show before, but the Democrat bench is very, very thin. And I've made no bones about it. I do not think a blue governor is going to be in a position to win the Democrat primary. If you look at a guy like Gavin Newsom, everybody was stroking Gavin Newsom for the last few months. He's on a podcast. He's on Kimmel. He's on Colbert. Gavin Newsom is in very, very deep fraud trouble in the state of California. Well, then where else would you look? Look at a guy like Andy Beshear. Andy Beshear is the governor of of Kentucky. This guy is a total lightweight. He has no national cachet. And go beyond these two guys. You've got like Gretchen Whitmer, J.B. Pritzker, Kathy Hochul. Whitmer, Pritzker, and Hochul are all in the same clown car. They are never going to be president of the United States. And I hear people talk about Westmore in Maryland. This is the same Westmore in Maryland that has a bridge in the water that's going to cost 5 point whatever billion. He's the one with an ecological disaster with waste spewing into the Potomac. Westmore, if that guy gets exposed on the national stage, That guy is a total stooge. He has no shot. If Westmore runs, he's going to get nuked. And I was actually talking to somebody about it over the weekend. They're like, well, what about Josh Shapiro? Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. Let me just address this because I'm not seeing Josh Shapiro as a national candidate. I think you're going to have a really big problem with Josh Shapiro. Now, why? Shapiro's a problem for a couple different reasons. Number one, Pennsylvania is a known hotbed of fraud. And look, I mentioned these other states, California, Minnesota, New York, Illinois. Pennsylvania is on that list. There is a lot of fraud going on in the state of Pennsylvania, not just with like Medicare, Medicaid, but also voter fraud. And if you step back and look at anything that's going on with Shapiro's policies in Pennsylvania, it's just like Spanberger in Virginia. Shapiro has not grown capital in Pennsylvania. What he has done is grow state and federal government debt. This man really has no major accomplishments in the state of Pennsylvania that you can point to. And I guess if you look at it, you say, well, he's just an affable person. And Shapiro kind of catapulted into national prominence because at one point he was rumored to be Kamala Harris's VP candidate. Well, we all know what ended up happening there. She ended up going with Tim Walz. And again, in the issue of being completely transparent, Shapiro has another issue. And to be fair, I think it's totally gross. But the left broadly is captive to what I call the great noticing. And it's interesting because the left is even more captive to the great noticing than the right. And just a few days ago, NBC confirmed that. NBC News reported last week that the collapse is real in the Democrat Party. Listen to this. Per NBC, only 13% of Democrats have a favorable view of Israel. You heard that correctly. 13% of Democrats view Israel positively. In 2013, 45% did. Now, for comparison on the right, because again, I always want to present kind of a fair, objective view here. For comparison, 66% of Republicans view Israel favorably. So I guess my point with this is in regards to like Shapiro is the great noticing is very, very real on the left. And it's so interesting because only 17% of Democrats favor Israel over Palestine. Those are big numbers by NBC, and you should be thinking about those numbers when you hear people talk about Josh Shapiro. But that issue of the great noticing and the issue of not supporting Israel is extremely pervasive in blue politics, especially with younger people. If you start looking into blue voters like in the millennial age bracket or the Gen Z age bracket, there is not a lot of love there for Israel. And I guess if you look at it this way, the Iran situation, this war over there, it's already unpopular in a lot of the right, but it's way more unpopular on the left because it's associated with Donald Trump. This Iran situation then is exacerbating the great noticing domestically. And as disgusting as I think that is as a human being, that's reality. And any poll is going to tell you that. That's the signal, not the noise about Josh Shapiro. So I guess either which way you want to look at Josh Shapiro, he's got some serious issues on the national stage. So if you remove blue governors from the conversation, what does that leave you with? That leaves you with federal candidates. Well, who are your federal candidates? AOC, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala, Cory Booker. Bernie Sanders, I guess, could be the kingmaker, but he's too old to run. He'd be like 86 by the time this whole thing runs around in 28. Elizabeth Warren is way too crazy. She's been totally exposed. And I guess the only person you could really look at is a guy like Mark Kelly. But Mark Kelly, let's be honest, after this whole thing with sedition and all this, Mark Kelly, his rhetoric is insane. Mark Kelly is an insane person. But I think Mark Kelly's going to have a lot of issues. And I guess let me throw something else out at you. How about old Hillary Clinton? And I'm going to tell you right now on the Foggy Dew, get ready for Hillary Clinton to come back. Because Hillary Clinton made news over the weekend. And I guess you might be asking, how could this even be possible that we're talking about old Hill Dog again? What did Hillary Clinton do over the weekend? Hillary Clinton was announced to headline the New Hampshire Democrat Party spring fundraiser. And you might be asking yourself, why does it matter that Hillary Clinton is headlining the New Hampshire Democrat Party spring fundraiser? Why does that matter? Well, New Hampshire holds the first Democratic primary for the White House race. And what I would tell you is if you study presidential elections and how this thing rolls out, old Hillary Clinton is testing the waters here. And to be fair, she probably has a lane. She probably has a lane because the field for the Democrat Party is so weak. And I guess she probably has a lane provided she's not getting arrested. I mean, she's a main figure in Russiagate, and here she is out thinking she's going to be president again. So if you put all that aside about Russiagate and what's going on in the Florida grand jury, she could absolutely run. It's almost mind-bending to conceive of that. This lady would be, I think, at like 80 or 81 years old in 2028. But if you're asking me sitting here today, I think it's totally plausible. I could see a Hillary Kamala ticket, Hillary AOC, Hillary Buttigieg, Hillary Kelly. But it's so interesting, like looking at 2028, it brings up another issue, regardless of the candidate. Meaning another issue for the party, because regardless of the candidate, if it's Kamala, if it's Hillary, whatever, what exactly is the platform for the Democrat Party? What's the platform? What is the agenda? I talked about Abigail Spanberger in Virginia a minute ago. She ran on affordability. She ran on affordability and shoved through, 1,200 laws into the Virginia state legislature? Just one tax after the other that's going to drive capital away? Is that the agenda? Is the agenda that Trump is Hitler? I mean, look at what I just talked about in Pennsylvania. They can't even define what a woman is. The whole party is so cynical. It has nothing to do with ideas. It has nothing to do with affordability. It's all about power. There is no vision. There is no plan. These people at a national level right now are actively trying to defund DHS and ICE. They want an open border. They want more illegals, more benefits for illegals. What's their energy plan? How will closing refineries in California make gasoline more affordable? I mean, I guess is their energy policy more windmills? What do they plan to do about AI? How do they plan to address fraud that we now know is totally rampant in blue states? What are they going to do to address the debt? How would Hillary or Kamala engage BRICS? And I guess, look, I know the answers to these questions. What they want to do is they want to go back to the, quote, rules-based order. They want to go back to the good old establishment days. Let's trust the experts. It's like Gavin Newsom. We're going to go ahead and double down on the World Health Organization. We're going to double down on NATO. We're going to double down on the UN. It's just brutal. Guys, there is no plan here. There is no vision. It's all buzzwords. It's all slogans. And really what it is, it's scare tactics and fear. You want woke back? You want more woke in your Star Trek and Star Wars? You want more DEI in your movies? I mean, I saw what came out of the Oscars. It was all terrible. It's all DEI. It's all woke. And it's interesting looking at this entire thing because here's Axios. In Axios might as well be Pravda. It is just a communist rag. But here's Axios putting out a piece the other day. Axios talks specifically about the Democrats' demographic issue in moving into 2028. The party is now discussing this openly. Axios reported that the Democrat insiders think that a, quote, straight white Christian man, end quote, would be their best bet in 28. Axios is reporting that Democrat insiders think a straight white Christian man is their best bet. And if you'll remember, Michelle Obama started this whole train of thought. She talked about it in the run-up to 2024. She said the U.S. is not ready for a woman. That was her quote. That was Michelle Obama's quote. And I guess according to Axios, Democrat strategists agree with her assessment. Quote, this is a quote from Axios. Quote, it has to be a white guy. End quote. What a mess. This is the party of Kennedy. The party of Kennedy painted themselves into an intellectual corner. It's the same thing. It's like the Pennsylvania legislature I mentioned a minute ago. You're in an intellectual corner now. This is the same party. They can't define a woman. They want DEI. They want woke. This is the same political party that ran off straight white Christian men. But I have to laugh at it because it's so cynical. And again, it's always with the racial profiling. This political party hasn't had a real primary in a decade. Hillary was installed. Biden was installed. Kamala was anointed. It's never about who's the best candidate, who's best for the job. It's what ingredients make the best racial salad that the voter will bite into. And to be fair, I don't really think they want a president. They don't really want a president. What they want is a party messenger. They want a mouthpiece, an organ for the party. They want the right racial stew for the state organ that they can install in the White House. It's almost like, look at Tim Walz. He's a great example of this. Look at Tim Walz. He's an affable white buffoon, an intellectual lightweight. Can you imagine Tim Walz negotiating with Iran or doing anything serious? These are Axios is talking about the same strategists that gave you Tim Walz. And I guess, what does that tell me? It just tells me that these strategists just have this like low intellect prejudice. Do you remember this whole thing in the lead up to 24? Walz was picked by these strategists to, quote, code talk to white men. And I guess that's what decades of racial obsession gets you. It's a parlor trick to voters. And I guess let me ask you another question while I'm on this whole rant here. Who's the real leader of the Democrat Party? Who is the intellectual workhorse of the Democrat Party? I mean, at one point it was Bernie. But Bernie was kneecapped so they could install Hillary because it was her turn. Is it AOC? Is it Kamala? Is it a guy like Mandami? I mean, I watch all this stuff. I'm very interested in what Democrat politicians do. Here are two leaders of the Democrat Party over the weekend. Here was Elizabeth Warren last week. Elizabeth Warren, the thought leader of the party. What is Elizabeth Warren doing? Is she working on the debt? Is she trying to figure out how to solve any issues? What she did is she introduced a wealth tax bill into the Senate. This is the same type of bill that is blowing up the Netherlands right now. It's a bill for socialism, and of course it's DOA. Her idea, her grand idea, she wants to tax the rich to pay for universal child care, lower housing costs. She wants to slash child poverty, expand Medicare, free community college. Bomb. It's the same thing that goes on in California. It's the same thing that goes on in Illinois. It's the same thing that goes on in New Jersey. It's the same thing that goes on in New York. They have these great slogans. Yep, works great until all the capital flees. And of course, we all know that Elizabeth Warren is just a communist. She's a communist in communist clothing. But look at a guy like Barack Obama. What is Barack Obama worried about? I talked about Barack Obama with this whole Spamberger thing in Virginia a couple weeks ago. Here's over the weekend. He's not talking about Iran. He's not talking about any of the myriad of issues that we're presented with in our society. Here's Barack Obama posting on X. He's talking about Virginia redistricting. Barack Obama is the standard bearer for the Democrat Party. And what he's worried about today is gerrymandering Virginia. Here's Barack Obama on X. Quote, this is Barack Obama. Protect your voting power and help level the playing field, end quote. There is nobody more transparently thin than Barack Obama in U.S. politics. He is all style, zero substance. Any real leader would be working on issues, real issues, not sitting around worrying about gerrymandering a state. But I guess just again, I wanted to talk about this whole thing. Like I saw Axios, I'm seeing Pennsylvania, I'm seeing all these things. But I guess get ready for Kamala, get ready for Hillary, and I guess some white dude to be named later. And I guess that white dude probably, by my estimation, would be Mark Kelly. Hillary Mark Kelly, Kamala Mark Kelly. And I guess from my perspective, I'll be watching the whole thing, and trust me, I'll be laughing too. They can't even define what a woman they can't even define what a woman is. It's just the best. Keep it up, guys. So, switching gears, the next couple of weeks are going to be big, but there's going to be big news this week out of the Supreme Court. Now, what's that news out of the Supreme Court? Another big case is going to be heard. It was announced over the weekend that the Supreme Court is going to hear this birthright citizenship case. And I guess before I even get into this whole thing with the birthright citizenship case, this is yet again another big case revolving around citizenship and voting. And let's just be honest, everything you're seeing at the Supreme Court, all these breadcrumbs that are laid out all over the place, it's stunning when you start tying it all together, knitting it all together. I'll start with the Supreme Court. First, the Voting Rights Act was litigated. That Voting Rights Act deal was heard like months ago. And people keep forgetting about it. This whole decision about the Voting Rights Act is pending. That case about the Voting Rights Act looked at state gerrymandering by race. And that's from Article 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And more than likely, it's going to go 6-3 against the Voting Rights Act because the whole thing is just blatantly unconstitutional. Now, when that decision is announced, and I'm pretty sure it's going to go 6-3, the Democrat Party is going to lose 15 to 20 gerrymandered race seats, congressional seats. State maps will have to be redrawn. That decision is going to be coming soon. I would imagine that decision about the Voting Rights Act, that's going to come out in April or May. And I guess the next big thing that came out of the Supreme Court was this whole election day thing that was litigated last week. And I'm pretty sure the decision on that is going to be 6-3 as well. The Constitution says election day. It's not election week. It's not election month. It's not count mail-in ballots until your preferred candidate wins. So you have these two huge cases, the Voting Rights Act deal, the election day deal. Those are both going to go 6-3. Now, pivoting back to birthright citizenship, I'm not really sure about that one. And I'll just say this up front. I don't think Trump is going to win this one, and I think it's a shame. And let me just kind of set the table here. Here's what happened. When Donald Trump was sworn in, he issued an executive order about this whole issue. That executive order basically said all government agencies should refuse issuing citizenship documents to children born to illegals or children who do not have one parent who is an American. And I guess when you look at this entire issue of his executive order, it's a textualist argument. This executive order directly goes against the plain language of the 14th Amendment. And I guess, what was the 14th Amendment? You have to back up to the Civil War. Now, the Civil War ended in 1865. From 1865 to 1870, there were 3 constitutional amendments passed. Those 3 amendments were called the Reconstruction Amendments or the Civil War Amendments. Now, what was Reconstruction? Was the social, political, legal challenges of rebuilding the South after the Civil War. Those 3 amendments were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 13th Amendment, let me just start there. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, so right when the war ended. What did it do? The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in involuntary servitude. And just a historical footnote about the 13th Amendment, the interval between the 12th Amendment and the 13th Amendment is the longest interval ever in between amendments. 61 years between passage. But the 13th Amendment basically overwrote the 3/5 compromise. The 3/5 compromise was from the founding. What was the 3/5 compromise? The 3/5 compromise counted a state's slave population with that ratio in its census. Slaves were not counted as one person in the census. So just for simple math, if you had 100 slaves in a state, then the math would say you have 100 slaves times 3/5. So basically what you have is you have 60 bodies for the census. That's how it would be counted. So the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, involuntary servitude. So each person now would now count at 100% in a census. The 13th Amendment also legally codified the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln provided. The Emancipation Proclamation occurred in 1863, so you had 2 years then where legal status of slaves was not codified. So that's the 13th Amendment. What about the 15th Amendment as a Civil War amendment? The 15th Amendment was groundbreaking also. The 15th Amendment prohibits the federal or a state from denying a citizen their right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 15th Amendment was the last one to be ratified. It was ratified in 1870. Now, it's interesting because Ulysses S. Grant won the presidency as a Republican in 1868. He narrowly won as a Republican. The Republican Party writ large viewed the 15th Amendment as a huge party win. Republicans and Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Therefore, franchising the black vote was seen as very important to the party's political fortunes. Now, this also had a secondary effect. So, franchising black vote was good for Republicans, but what it also did is it also created the KKK. And the KKK was all Democrats. Because if you go back into history, most black people post-Civil War were Republicans. So Republicans with the 15th Amendment made the correct political calculus. So there's the 13th Amendment, there's the 15th Amendment, now the 14th. Well, the 14th was ratified in 1868. It was the Middle Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment is one of the most litigated amendments in U.S. history. Broadly, what the 14th Amendment addresses is citizenship rights, due process, equal protection. The 14th Amendment is used in so many huge cases in U.S. history. You had Roe versus Wade. You had the Dred Scott case, Brown versus the Board of Education, Bush versus Gore. And I guess if you wanted to, I could sit here and talk all day about the 14th Amendment because liberal progressives use the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment for everything. They use the Equal Protection Clause as a cudgel for their own politics. But either which way you want to look at the 14th Amendment, the upcoming Supreme Court case in birthright citizenship deals with the citizenship clause in the 14th Amendment. Here is the plain, and this is where this is Trump's Achilles heel here. Here's the plain language from the 14th Amendment. Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of are citizens of the United States and the state in which they reside, end quote. That language is pretty plain. That is pretty straightforward. The issue here, though, however, is totally obvious. It says if you are physically born on this soil, you are a U.S. citizen. The challenge intellectually here is that that amendment was written to mean slaves. This was not written, the 14th Amendment was not written in a time of mass illegal immigration. Imagine a 9-month pregnant Honduran illegal lady. She steps foot on U.S. soil and has the baby. Because of the 14th Amendment, that baby is now a citizen of the U.S. and entitled to every single benefit afforded to a U.S. citizen. So that baby literally, just because it's born on our soil, is now a full-blown citizen, same as somebody that stormed the beaches of Normandy. And look, even before Joe Biden and his mass invasion, this was a problem. Foreign nationals have been using this for decades and decades for chain migration. Imagine a Chinese national. They have literally tourism packages in China for this. Imagine a Chinese national. You have a Chinese national flying over 9 months pregnant, has the baby day one. The parents are Chinese nationals, but that baby is now an American citizen. This is a legal loophole that has been abused, again, for decades by progressives and quite honestly by our enemies. anchor babies, you've got foreign espionage, you've got a foreign invasion. That's how they use the 14th Amendment here. And I guess the main problem here and why Donald Trump had to write an executive order, the main problem today with the 14th Amendment was Joe Biden's invasion. You had 20 to 30 million illegals that just invaded our soil. We had an open border for how many years? And I don't care what Alexander Mayorkas said on CNN. I saw millions of people storming the border. We have an open border with a welfare system. Milton Friedman warned against that. You have an open border with a welfare system. You've got sanctuary states and cities welcoming these people with open arms. Here's your free housing. Here's your free food. Here's your free healthcare. Progressives and Democrats used it to overload the system. They overloaded the system legally. So here's Donald Trump in response to this invasion and these people having these anchor chain migration babies on our soil. Trump issues his executive order day one. Because quite frankly, I don't know what else Donald Trump could do. I mean, I've just spent, 30 minutes ragging on the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party, as it's constituted today, is never, and I mean never, going to address this legally ever. So the legislature, the Congress, the Senate, they're not going to act on this whole problem. So Donald Trump is forced into a position where he has to cut an executive order. And again, backing up to my whole point on this whole conversation is going to occur this week, but legally speaking, he's going to lose this one. And my suspicion on this whole thing, his argument here is going to be jus soli, which is, quote, right of territory. Europe, Asia, the Middle East, none of these people have a soil law like this. That's what that means. That right of territory is a soil law. A guarantee of citizenship if you are born on this soil. So again, to be fair, Donald Trump's executive order is common sense. Not only is it common sense, it's also about the United States being sovereign. Illegal entry should not give citizenship to a person born on our soil. Anybody being honest that studies history knows that that was not the purpose of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was meant for slaves, not illegal invaders from foreign powers that hate us. And that's really the point. These illegals could have allegiance elsewhere. So I guess through this whole process, this legal loophole, the 14th Amendment, we are then cognitively creating anchor babies whose parents might hate the United States. We have an anchor baby now with a parent that might swear allegiance to a foreign enemy, China, Russia, Iran, even Mexico. Those are just 4 countries right there that are trying to undermine the United States. And we give them a legal loophole to just have a baby here on our soil? Trump's going to lose this one. Roberts, Coney Barrett, Sotomayor, Brown Jackson, Kagan. It'll be them against Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. So it'll be a 5-4 loss or a 6-3 loss. Because there's absolutely no way. I've watched John Roberts for a long time, and Coney Barrett is weak as she's a weak read too. Those two people are never going to go against the 14th Amendment, not the plain textualist interpretation of it. And to be fair, if I'm being intellectually honest, common sense shouldn't overturn textualist interpretations of the Constitution. So if I'm looking at it that way, if I believe in textualist behavior, then it really should be 9-0 against this thing. Because again, forget the whole argument about the subject matter, forget the common sense. An executive order does not override the Constitution. I mean, imagine an executive order from like a President Kamala where she strokes a gun confiscation executive order. That executive order issued by President Kamala Harris does not override the Second Amendment. And I think anybody here knows that I'm not arguing against common sense, but an executive order is not the correct way legally to fix this problem. And I just said it a minute ago, the Democrat Party will die on this hill. That is truly their Alamo. They will never pass a law that changes this. So again, we're going to see these arguments this week, but I'm just prepping everybody right now because you're going to hear a lot of conversation on it. Trump, common sense, they're going to lose this one. But I guess we'll all be watching the Supreme Court and see how this whole thing goes. Okay, so I'll go ahead and wrap this show up for today. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew signing off.